unseen realm, and the unseen realm is far more greater and vaster than the realm of the seen world. There's the unseen and the seen. Okay, we now live في عالم الحس, the physical world in which we can see. But there's an unseen world, a lot of things happening, a lot of strange, fantastic, amazing things that happen in the unseen realm. And the unseen realm is far more greater, far more vast than the seen realm. And the Prophet ﷺ began to, despite Islam now being under threat from a lot of the people of Mecca, in particular the Prophet's family, and despite the fact that many people have yet still to become Muslim, and despite the fact that Mecca itself has yet to become Muslim, we find that the unseen realm now, the jinn are taking an interest. Okay? And the reason why the jinn began to take interest is that they realized there was a stronger protection in the heavens. They couldn't normally, if they wanted to know something, and they'd go up to the heavens to see and listen. But they found that now it was a lot more protected. It wasn't as easy to go and listen and to spy. I remember that when the Prophet was born, several levels of Jannah were now blocked off from the jinn and the shayateen, if you remember. So they realized, and once they worked out why the reason for this was the Prophet, the reason why they were prevented from listening to the heavens, they then wanted to go and find out more about this Prophet. What has prevented us from listening to the heavens? Right? So they went to their people and the jinn, and they told the jinn, and they returned back to the Prophet and the Prophet began to speak to them and explain to them about Islam and so forth. And one night the Sahaba narrate that the Prophet disappeared, and they were very scared and quite shocked, because at that time people were trying to harm the Prophet, and also there was threats against the Prophet himself. When the Prophet disappeared for a whole night, the Sahaba got worried, and they didn't, particularly when they didn't know. Nobody knew where he went. And the Prophet came back and explained. He said, I was talking to the jinn, and the jinn actually became Muslim. And the Prophet then would actually go and sit and talk to them and teach them more about Islam. And one day, the Prophet was sitting with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, obviously he became Muslim now, if you remember, young shepherd. And the Prophet asked, who wants to come with me? He wants to come with me to see the jinn. To see the jinn, or to attend this experience where the Prophet is teaching the jinn. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, a young boy, said yes. MashaAllah, yes. Why should he have anything to fear? He's with the Prophet. Nothing to fear. He's with the Prophet. He's a young boy. Now if somebody said to you, who wants to, I'm going to sit down with the jinn, 20 jinn, he wants to come with me, in the park tonight, inshallah. He wants to come. Most people are going to come. With Abdullah ibn Mas'ud as a young boy, Bismillah, I'm with the Prophet. What's going to happen? It's Iman. And the Prophet goes outside of Mecca. That's where he used to meet. And the Prophet drew a circle and told Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to stay in the circle. Don't go out the circle. Stay within the circle. And then the Prophet went a bit ahead, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is sitting in the circle. Okay. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says that he sees now this thing called al-aswada, like this cloud, this black clouds. Start coming, which is the jinn. It's like these black clouds all coming from the mountain. And the Prophet was sitting there, and these beings, black beings, were there, and they were there for quite a while. and the Prophet was teaching them, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said he could hear strange voices, and a group of them went, and the group remained, and then that group that remained just went, and then the Prophet went to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud asked the Prophet exactly what just happened, what were those noises, and the Prophet said the noise that you hear at the end, that was their voices, they were saying goodbye to me. And the reason why a certain group remained behind is because they wanted to ask several questions. They wanted to ask and the Prophet gave us some very interesting information about the jinn. In particular, the food that they eat. The jinn, the bones, the leftover bones of our food, the chicken bones or the meat bones or the fish bones, leftover bones, that is the jinn's food. The jinn will eat the bones that we eat, for example, our leftovers. And when we throw it away, Allah then puts meat on it for them. The bones become fleshed again, and they eat it. Okay, which is why it's makruh to use bones to clean oneself with. If you remember in the books of fiqh, they say it's makruh. Why? Because it's the food of the jinn. So the jinn will be upset to using their food to clean yourself with as toilet paper. You're very upset. And this is why when the ulama have mentioned that when we throw away our rubbish or the garbage, that we should say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim when we throw it away. The reason for that is that then only the Muslim jinn can eat. The non-Muslim jinn will not be able to eat. We say Bismillah. There's a hadith in which the Prophet was sitting eating with some Sahaba, and a man came and wanted to eat, and the Prophet held his hand, grabbed his hand and said, say Bismillah. And he was a Bedouin, he said Bismillah, and the Prophet said, let go of his hand. And the Prophet explained, had this man, if he didn't say Bismillah, then the jinn would eat with us, and the food would have no barakah. So make sure when you're making food, say Bismillah, you have more barakah. Particularly now you have Mashayikh coming. We want the food to last a bit longer. Okay, so that's interesting. And despite now, you have the people now, even the jinn, the unseen world now realizing this man, is a prophet. You get people now. We have Abu Dharr al-Ghafari, outside. All these people now, even monks now realizing this reality. But the people in Mecca, the vast majority of the people in Mecca are blinded from the Prophet's reality. And they say, subhanAllah, that one night the Sahaba saw some fire, and it was the fire of the jinn, and this increased their iman. So now there's a man who has, mashallah, a big difference. There's a man who is famous for helping to cure people who are sick, who have mental illnesses. Okay, he'd do what we would call ruqya. And this man, he heard people saying, oh, there's a man called Muhammad, and he has some mental issues. He's insane. So he thought, I'll do a good favor. I'll go and cure him. So he goes to the Prophet, and he says to the Prophet, I hear that you have some mental issues, mental problems. I'll help you, I'll cure you. Okay? And the Prophet said to him, the Prophet then recited some verses of the Quran to him. Right? And the man, after listening to these verses, the man looked at amazed and said, this is not the speech of someone insane. These words, these are not the words of a person who's unstable mentally. These are amazing words. And then he said and then he became Muslim, and he went to his people and called his people to Islam. And the people of Quraysh, they sat with each other and began to work out, what do we call Muhammad? We can't call him a liar because he's known as Al-Amin. Now you think now, if you take a step back, that one thing they could not call him was a liar. All right, he's not a liar. All right, so if he's not a liar, why do you believe him? Would be the logical response. He's not a liar. Okay, and we all agree, because when they came to what label can we put on him? What can we tell people? We want to turn people away from him. We don't want people to listen to him. If we can't call him a liar, he's not a liar. If he's not a liar, why don't you listen to him? These people, the hearts were covered for several reasons, which probably later on we'll talk about. And they then began to say, well, who from amongst us is knowledgeable in sorcery? Who can go to him and perhaps judge whether he's doing magic? Okay, because for them they're saying he can't be a prophet, but yet all these people listening to him, so maybe he has some magic that he's bewitching people. He's making people listen to him. And there's a man called Utbah ibn Abi Rabi'ah who then says, I am knowledgeable in magic, and I'll go and I'll judge for myself if he really is a magician. And he was also somebody who was very well versed in poetry. He knew the poetry, so anything with poetry he knew. So he goes to the Prophet, and he then obviously offers the Prophet several things. He goes, oh Muhammad, you've done this and you've done this, and these problems have happened and so forth. We'll give you wealth. We'll give you position. We'll make you a king over us. We'll make you a leader. All these type of things. And he begins to say to him, are you better than your grandfather? Are you better than your great grandfather? And he starts mentioning several people who are famous in the Prophet's tribe, notable people, and saying, in other words, hinting, none of your relatives said this. Are you better than your grandfather? Are you better than your uncle? Are you better than your great grandfather? None of them said this. So now, are you saying you're better than them? So he's trying to make the Prophet, feel guilty. Obviously, the Prophet is not stupid. Obviously, the Prophet is not stupid, and yes, the Prophet is better. But to the Arabs, at that time, it's like people now saying, "Are you better than the Prophet? Are you better than the Sahaba?" Akhi, the Prophet didn't do it. The Sahaba didn't do it. It's the same mentality. The same mentality as these people nowadays. SubhanAllah. And the Prophet remained silent. He let him say everything he wants to say, and once he's finished, the Prophet then said, have you finished? He goes, yes. He goes, in that case, I've listened to you, now you listen to me. And the Prophet then begins to recite to him several verses of the Quran. And Utbah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, he's so amazed at these beautiful words that he sits back, and in one narration he puts his hands back behind his head, he starts relaxing and listening to these beautiful words, and he becomes very impressed with these things. And the Prophet keeps on reciting until the Prophet reaches a verse talking about lightning bolts. Lightning bolts? And a punishment of lightning bolts will strike those who disbelieve. And when he got to that verse, Utbah ibn Abi Rabi'ah jumped and he put his hand on the Prophet's mouth. I said, please, don't say that. Don't finish the rest of that verse off. And he went home. And he was quite scared. He went home and he disappeared for a while. Obviously, the Abu Jahl and the rest of the Mushrikun, they're like, where's he gone? He must have become Muslim. He's disappeared. He hasn't come back to us. So they go to his house. And Abu Jahl finds him and then accuses him of being a Muslim. He goes, you've changed. You've become a Muslim, haven't you? Now, Utbah ibn Abi Rabi'ah says, no, I'm not a Muslim. However, the Prophet has recited words. I have heard words that I have never ever heard before. These words. And I know poetry. I know the Arabs. I know the Arabic. I know the different types of poetry. I haven't heard this before. And the Prophet was mentioning these beautiful things to me. And the Prophet got to a verse about the punishment. And I got scared that I covered his mouth. And the reason why I covered his mouth was we all know that he's truthful. And had he finished the rest of the verse off, I would have fear for myself that lightning would strike me and strike you. Because the Prophet's talking about us. So he didn't knew. And he had fear. He was so scared. Oh, please don't say that. In case it comes down on top of him. Despite this, he still doesn't become Muslim. Despite this, still does not become Muslim. So, and Utbah says, we know that whatever the Prophet says, it comes true. He's not a liar. One day we find that Mughira ibn Shu'bah and Abu Jahl, Mughira ibn Abi Shu'bah and Abu Jahl were walking. And the Prophet was talking to Abu Jahl and said, oh, Abu al-Hakam. Okay, that's his name, Abu al-Hakam. And he was calling him to Islam, and he called him to Islam. And despite the fact that Abu Jahl had harmed the Prophet, had abused the Prophet, was actively engaged in trying to stop Islam spreading, despite all of these things, the Prophet still called him. Despite all of these things, the Prophet still went and called him, and he didn't give up on him. He didn't say, he's no good, and so forth. He kept on. He kept, despite all the outward animosity and hatred that he had. And Abu Jahl said to him, look, will you leave criticizing our gods and humiliating our gods? Will you stop doing that? Because don't forget, the Prophet was saying, don't follow multiple gods. Don't worship idols. Don't do this. Don't do that. These things are multiple statues and so forth. The Prophet was calling against that. That's all wrong. Obviously with wisdom. And obviously, which is, hurting their feelings. But it's the truth. It's Allah. And so Abu Jahl said, look, will you stop harming our gods? Saying what you say about them? Are you going to stop saying these things about them? And then he said, look, I'm a witness that you've passed on the message. Look, I get it. He says, look, I understand. It's your duty not to tell me. And khalas, I'm a witness that you've told me. But from now, please be quiet. I don't want to hear anything else. That's what he says. That's what he says to him. Are you going to stop criticizing our gods? And he says, look, I know that you want to tell me these things, and okay, I'm a witness now that you've told me, so no need to say anything else. Can you keep quiet? That's what he tells the Prophet. And he then says to him, to the Prophet, and if I knew that you were telling the truth, if I knew you were truthful, I would not follow you anyway. That's what he said. And then the Prophet was silent. Then Abu Jahl walked away with Mughira ibn Abi Shu'bah. And the point of this story is that Mughira ibn Abi Shu'bah, he narrates this many years later. And he says that in this incident, Abu Jahl, as he's walking away, turned round to Mughira ibn Shu'bah and says to him, Muhammad is telling the truth. He tells the truth. He's telling the truth. See, he knew, but he wouldn't accept it. Now you're going to say, why? Why did he not accept it? What prevented him from accepting this? Okay. And this hadith is written by Imam al-Bayhaqi. And what we find in it is a very interesting insight into the psychology of Abu Jahl. We have an insight into Abu Jahl's psychology and the reasons why he did not take the message of Islam. Here's his reply. Okay, his reply. Very interesting reply. He says, he said, I swear by Allah that I know that what he is saying is true. ولكن, however, Bani Qusay, which is the Prophet's one of his great-grandfathers, he says, his great-great-grandfather, Qusay, have taken on the privileges of the people of Hajj. Okay. And he says, and we said yes. And then they said that we have the nadwa. Nadwa is a difficult word to translate. I'm not sure how to translate, but nadwa, a particular a responsibility. And then Abu Jahl says, and we said yes to them. Then they said that we have a liwa, like a flag, this type of flag that they had of honor, and we said yes to that as well. Then they took on the responsibility of taking on the watering of the people of Hajj, and we said yes to that. And then they started to feed people, and we took that. I mean, we let them do that as well. And now they are claiming now that they have a prophet. Now they claim that they have a prophet. And he says, to this we won't accept. In other words, what he's saying is this, that his tribe have taken the responsibility of this and looking after the people of Hajj, and you got all these type of things. And we've said yes, we've gone along. And now they're going to say they've got a prophet. He said, no, this we won't accept. In other words, what he's saying is that perhaps had it been from somebody closer to him, he would have a problem with it. Perhaps it would be somebody a bit more closer. He goes, he has the Prophet's branch here. Has he taken all the responsibilities? MashaAllah, no. So it was jealousy, arrogance, and at the end is tribalism and a bit of racism, you could say. This tribalism is a big problem. That's what prevented him from becoming Muslim. Very interesting insight into his mind. He goes, they've taken everything. No, the Prophet. MashaAllah, nothing left now. We're not. We've accepted everything else. We've given them, everything else what they've asked for. Now you're asking now for us to follow, their Prophet. So for him, it's more an idea of dominance. They're too dominant now. They can't have that. Okay. So we come now to a very fascinating incident that, subhanAllah, tells you again that they knew the Prophet was telling the truth. This incident, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sit at night and recite the Quran. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and recite the Quran, and people outside his house could hear. If you're nearby, you'd be able to hear. And what used to happen is the mushrikun would come, and they would in the night, and they would listen. Several individuals would come and listen, and they would hear the beautiful voice of the Prophet reciting the Quran, the beauty of the Quran. So they had these great words from Allah recited by the Prophet's voice, MashaAllah. And they were very attracted to it. They became very attracted to that. Until when the light, when it became a bit more lighter, they were about to leave, and what they realized that they saw each other. They were like, oh, and they said, what are you doing here? And he said, oh, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, and then he said, oh, if people knew that we were here listening to Muhammad, the weak amongst us, from our followers, would start to listen to him. So they all made a promise They all made a promise that nobody would come back the next night. Nobody would come back the next night. Okay? And the next night, each of these individuals was sitting in his bed, and each one had this desire. They couldn't sleep. They said, we want to go to listen to those words again. These beautiful words recited from the Prophet's mouth and the beautiful way. Something inside them would not allow them to sleep. They couldn't sleep. So each one thought to himself, well, we promised each other we wouldn't come back, so I'm gonna go. If I go back, nobody knows I'm gonna be there. So I can go there and sit there and listen, and relax. These beautiful words recited by the Prophet's beautiful voice, and each one does that. Each one has that idea, and that's part of their nafs. They couldn't sleep. They go to listen to it, and they go and they sit outside the Prophet's house and listening. Each one different places, but they can listen. And then, as it becomes light, the day comes, they realize each other. Oh, they're all here again, a second time. They say, what's going on? Didn't we make a promise? SubhanAllah, the next night we should make sure we can't do this again. If people knew that we were here. And these people, SubhanAllah, they say that these people were quite, people who were very notable. 7 individuals in total. Here we go. It's Abu Sufyan, and Abu Jahl as well was there. Abu Sufyan bin Harb وأبو جهل والأخنس والأخنس اسمه أخنس. Okay, SubhanAllah. And this narration said that they would hear the Prophet praying in the middle of the night. So the next night they're all sitting and they've all made a promise and they've all been caught out. They've all caught each other out. And on the third night the same thing happens. They couldn't sleep. And they said, SubhanAllah, the first night, we got caught, we caught each other. The second night, we caught each other again. The third night, nobody's going to think to come back. And each one had the idea, if I go there, nobody else is going to be there. Nobody else, So the first one went and the second one, and each one had the same idea. And they went to listen to the Prophet praying, in his prayer, reading the Quran. And the third night, what happens when it gets daylight? They see each other again. SubhanAllah. So look at these people, they knew. But in the darkness, they couldn't even admit to each other. They knew it was telling the truth. They knew, in their side, they knew it was truth. Okay. Khair inshallah. Okay. And we also have Walid ibn Mughira. The Prophet would recite a verse of Quran to him, and Walid ibn Mughira became so amazed by these beautiful words that he actually told the Prophet, repeat it again, let me hear that again. And the Prophet recited again, the same verse. And Walid ibn Mughira said, can you repeat it again, please? Yeah, let me hear that again. And the Prophet recited several times these verses. And Abu Jahl, when he heard about this, that Walid ibn Mughira had this experience, he went to Walid ibn Mughira and said, we'll give you some money. He goes, I don't need any money, I'm rich. He goes, we'll give you some money because we heard you've left your religion and followed Muhammad. And he got angry. Abu Jahl was trying to test him, look, we'll pay you, we'll give you money, don't worry, if you're going to go that way, we'll pay you. And Abu Jahl knows that he's quite rich, so he's insulting him. He's insulting, we'll pay you off, you've lost yourself. And he says, no, I haven't followed his religion. I'm not following his religion, and I have plenty of money, I'm not in need. But I tell you something, his words are very beautiful. Okay, SubhanAllah. And we have several incidents in which Abu Jahl himself now tries to boast to the people that he's going to do this, and going to do this, and going to harm the Prophet. And several incidents in which he tries to harm the Prophet. Each time he sees a vision that terrifies him. He sees a vision that terrifies him, and he runs away scared. And people are saying, "What's wrong with you? You know, Muhammad he's just there. Are you running away?" As if there's people, and he goes, "I'm seeing things that you don't see." And Abu Jibreel would come and transform into a very terrifying vision that would scare him, and he would run away. And he would run away. Okay. We have a very interesting situation that the mother or the wife of Abu Jahl, her name used to be Jamil. Jamil means to be pretty, beautiful, the mother of the beautiful. And they changed her name to Qabih, the mother of the disgusting, of the vile. And that's what it became known as. And when the surah came down, Tabbat yada abi lahab wa tab, when the surah came down, was revealed, she heard about it. And obviously her husband is mentioned in it, and also she's mentioned in it. Now to her, she doesn't believe that the Prophet is a prophet, and to her he's just just reciting some poetry. So what she took it as is that the Prophet now is making up poetry about her. So she comes, Abu Bakr is sitting with the Prophet, and she comes and she has something in the hand. She walks straight up to Abu Bakr and she says to Abu Bakr, "What's this I hear about Muhammad mentioning some lines about me, saying that I have this thing around my neck in hell and these type of things. Tell him have you seen him?" And the Prophet is sitting next to him. And he goes, "Tell him when you see him that I'm going to do this, I'm going to harm him, I'm going to hit him," and so forth. And Abu Bakr says to her, "Can you see anybody with me?" And then she shouts at him even more. She gets angry. "You crazy? What's wrong with you? Are you by yourself?" And she walks away. And then Abu Bakr turns to the Prophet, and the Prophet explains to her, "She couldn't see me. There's a veil. There's a veil. Truly, there was a veil. There was a veil in the eyes, and a veil in the heart. She couldn't see the Prophet physically at that moment in time, nor could her heart realize and see the truth of the Prophet." And at that moment in time, it's a very bad state. Prior to that, when they could see him, but now, that's like the ultimate curse, you could say. Her heart is blocked, her heart is covered, veiled, she can't see from her heart. And now her physical eyes, she can't see the Prophet at that particular moment in time. So day after day, and things will get more difficult for the Muslims. And the kuffar, the mushrikun, began to think of ways to deal with this issue. They went to Abu Talib and they complained to Abu Talib. Abu Talib was the uncle and the main leader of the tribe, somebody who's very noble, has a very good position. They go try and plead with him, "Listen, tell your nephew, please stop doing this." They're trying different ways. Abu Talib then calls the Prophet to come to his house and tries to reason, if you want to call it reason, or tries to convince the Prophet to stop doing what he's doing. And the Prophet then obviously says, "No, I'm going to continue doing this." And Abu Talib says, "Look, people are complaining about you. Could you stop cursing or stop saying things about people's gods?" And despite this, the Prophet didn't, said, "No, I'm going to stick to what I'm doing." And Abu Talib then just requested that he listen. This wasn't enough. This wasn't enough for the people. And they came back to Abu Talib and requested Abu Talib now do something else. Put a bit more pressure. Abu Talib then calls the Prophet to his house and he tells him, "Look, stop doing this. You are splitting families up. People are father and son, wife and so on. They're all splitting up and causing, it was peaceful before. You've come now. And whenever truth comes, إِذَا جَاءَ الْحَقِّ زهق الباطل. Whenever truth comes, then falsehood disappears. Providing is truth. Truth and falsehood cannot remain in the same place. They can't occupy the same place. Like light and darkness, they can't occupy. They're two opposites. One dominates. Okay, and what's happening now? The truth now is dominating. So Abu Talib now is pleading with his nephew, and he's under pressure as well. And the Prophet gives his famous speech that if the sun was put in the right hand and the moon was in my left hand, then I would not give up this affair. And then he had his famous speech, and then the Prophet got up to leave. And as he was leaving, the Prophet began to cry. And then Abu Talib then called him back and said to him, come back, continue what you are doing, I will protect you. Which is why they went to him in the first place, because he was protecting him. The protection. And without Abu Talib's protection, the people could do what they want, but he's protected. He's protected by Allah anyway. In reality, protected by Allah. But in the realm of people, in people's minds, Abu Talib was protecting him. Well, Allah was protecting him. I believe these were the means. And we found that Abu Talib would pass away, and what the protection of the Prophet? He's still protected. He's the Prophet. No one killed him. No one did anything to him. He still lived. They all die or become Muslim afterwards. And the Prophet, his religion spreads. And they then go and they offer Abu Talib a compromise. They say, look, give Muhammad to us, but don't worry, we'll exchange him. We'll give you another boy, a young man in exchange. We'll give you a very nice man, handsome, mashallah. He won't be like the Prophet Muhammad, obviously, but we'll give you him and you in exchange. So we will replace him. Give him to us. And Abu Talib said, are you crazy? You want me to give you my nephew so you can kill him and you give me somebody else in return? Well, this is how desperate they were. How desperate they were. What happens now? The fact that the Prophet now is not being handed over, and they've tried now through what they call diplomatic means, then they now change now to something slightly more harsher and a bit more drastic, which is what we would call nowadays has an economic sanctions or blockade, economic sanctions or a freeze on the assets of the Muslims, in particular of the tribe of Bani Hashim, Abu Talib's tribe in particular. A pact is made in which nobody shall talk to them, Muslim or non-Muslim, the whole tribe. No one should talk to them. No one should marry from them. No one should marry with them. No one should do business with them. No one should give them any food. No one should talk to them. In other words, what we would call nowadays is economic sanctions. Economics freeze everything. No one talks to them. No one goes near them. No one sits with them. No one gives them any food. No one sells to them. No one buys from them. No one marries from them. MashaAllah, khalas. Okay, and this is part of these methods of the people of falsehood. These methods will always continue. Different names, but the reality is the same. These type of things, but nothing's changed. That's how people who want to harm other people, that they use these techniques. The enemies of Allah will use these techniques in every time, in every age. But the Muslims, for 3 years, there's economic sanctions. 3 years. 3 years. And things get so difficult that they then end up eating the leaves of trees, and they begin to have ulcers in their mouths. They begin to get their health is affected. And it's interesting that the whole tribe got this. Had this sanction. It wasn't just the Muslims within the tribe; it was the whole tribe. Because the idea was that let's put pressure on the whole tribe, so they can give this. And the idea is that we will continue doing this. We will isolate you. We will not talk or do anything with you until you give in to our demands. And our demand is that we want the Prophet Muhammad to be handed over to us. Until you do that, the sanctions will not be lifted. Until you do that. So that's what we'll talk about next week, inshallah. Wallahu alam. Any questions?
How big is the tribe?
Wallahu alam. I'm not too sure. But all of them. The whole Bani Hashim, our tribe.